Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of becoming a Navy SEAL. Growing up in a small Texas town, she spent her childhood watching military documentaries and reading stories about elite warriors. Her father, a retired Marine, had filled her head with tales of honor, courage, and sacrifice. At 18, she enlisted with determination burning in her chest and stars in her eyes. But dreams and reality rarely align perfectly. The sun blazed mercilessly over the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Coronado, California. Sarah wiped sweat from her brow as she approached the shooting range for what felt like the 100th time that month. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from frustration that had been building like pressure in a steam kettle. "Martinez, you're up!" Instructor Chief Petty Officer Williams barked, his voice cutting through the coastal breeze like a blade. Sarah took her position, feet shoulder-width apart, hands gripping the standard-issue rifle with practiced precision. Around her, other trainees watched from the sidelines. Some had already completed their qualifications with flying colors. Others, like her, were still fighting to prove they belonged. She had been here before, too many times. The target stood 200 meters away, a simple black silhouette against a tan backdrop. It should have been straightforward. She had studied the mechanics of shooting until she could recite them in her sleep: breathing control, sight alignment, trigger squeeze. She knew the theory better than most of her instructors. "Take your time, Martinez," Chief Williams said, his tone softer than usual. "Remember what we talked about." Sarah nodded, settling into her stance. She controlled her breathing, drawing in a slow, measured breath. The rifle felt heavy in her arms, heavier than it should have. She aligned the front and rear sights, placing the target in perfect view. Her finger found the trigger, applying steady pressure just as the manual instructed. The crack of the rifle echoed across the range. She lowered the weapon and peered downrange, squinting against the bright California sun. The white target remained unmarked. "Another miss." "Again," Chief Williams commanded, though his voice carried less authority than before. There was something else there now, something that sounded dangerously close to pity. Sarah reset her position, tried to clear her mind of the mounting pressure. 23 other trainees in her class had passed their marksmanship qualifications. She was the only one left struggling with what should have been the most basic skill of a warrior. The second shot missed by an even wider margin, then the third, and the fourth. By the time Chief Williams called ceasefire, Sarah had emptied 2 full magazines without hitting the target once. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the Pacific breeze seemed to hold its breath. "Pack it up, Martinez," Chief Williams said quietly. "See me in my office." The walk from the range to the administrative building felt like a death march. Other trainees avoided eye contact. Some out of respect, others out of embarrassment for her. Sarah's boots crunched against the gravel path, each step echoing the rhythm of her failing heartbeat. Chief Williams's office was small and cluttered with military memorabilia. Photographs of successful SEAL teams lined the walls, their faces radiating the confidence and competence Sarah desperately wanted to possess. She stood at attention while he shuffled through paperwork, the sound of rustling papers filling the uncomfortable silence. "Sit down, Martinez," he finally said. Sarah remained standing. "I prefer to stand, Chief." "I said sit down." His tone left no room for argument. She lowered herself into the metal chair facing his desk, her back straight despite the weight of disappointment pressing down on her shoulders. Chief Williams leaned back in his chair, studying her with tired eyes. He was a 20-year veteran who had seen countless hopefuls come and go. Most washed out during the grueling physical challenges Hell Week claimed the majority. But Sarah had survived all of that. She had proven herself capable of enduring sleep deprivation, hypothermia, and physical punishment that would break most people. Yet she couldn't hit a stationary target at 200 meters. "You know why you're here," he began. "Yes, Chief." "Explain it to me." Sarah swallowed hard. "My marksmanship scores are below acceptable standards." "Below acceptable standards," he repeated slowly. "Martinez, you haven't hit a target in 3 weeks. Not once. Do you understand what that means?" She did understand. It meant the end of everything she had worked for. It meant disappointing her father, her family, herself. It meant that the little girl who had dreamed of serving her country at the highest level had been living in a fantasy. "I understand, Chief. Do you?" He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. "Because I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. You're physically capable. Your endurance scores are in the top 10% of your class. Your tactical knowledge is exceptional. Your leadership potential is off the charts. But you can't hit the broadside of a barn." The words stung because they were true. Sarah had excelled in every other aspect of training. She could run faster and longer than most of her male counterparts. She could solve complex tactical problems under pressure. She had even saved a fellow trainee from drowning during a particularly brutal ocean exercise. But none of that mattered if she couldn't shoot straight. "There's more," Chief Williams continued. "I've been watching you, Martinez. Really watching. And I've noticed something interesting. When you're on the range, surrounded by instructors and other trainees, you fall apart. But during the solo practice sessions, when you think no one is watching, your form is textbook perfect." Sarah blinked in surprise. She hadn't realized anyone had observed her during those quiet evening hours when she snuck back to the range alone. "The problem isn't your skill," he said. "It's in your head. Chief, let me finish." He held up a hand. "I've seen this before, though never to this extreme. Performance anxiety. The pressure of being watched, of being judged, of representing something bigger than yourself, it's crushing you." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. Performance anxiety sounded like a weakness, like an excuse. "I can overcome it, Chief. I just need more time. Time is something we don't have." He pulled out a manila folder and opened it. "Your evaluation period ends in 48 hours. If you don't pass your marksmanship qualification by then, you'll be transferred out of the program." The room seemed to shrink around her. 48 hours to overcome weeks of failure. 48 hours to prove she belonged among the elite warriors she had admired her entire life. "However," Chief Williams continued, "there might be another option." Sarah's heart jumped. "Chief, there's someone I want you to meet. Commander Jake Morrison. He's not officially part of the training staff, but he's here consulting on a new program. He's also one of the finest marksmen I've ever seen." He paused, studying her reaction. "If anyone can help you figure out what's going wrong in that head of yours, it's him." "When?" Sarah asked immediately. "Tomorrow morning, 0500 hours. Range 7. Chief Williams closed the folder and looked at her directly. "Martinez, this is your last chance. Commander Morrison is doing me a personal favor by agreeing to work with you. Don't waste it." "I won't, Chief." Dismissed. Sarah stood and headed for the door, her mind already racing with possibilities. She had heard whispers about Commander Morrison during her time at the facility. The other trainees spoke of him in hushed, reverent tones. Supposedly, he held several military marksmanship records and had completed more successful missions than anyone had a right to survive. If anyone could help her, it would be him. That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk staring at the ceiling. The barracks were quiet except for the soft snoring of her fellow trainees and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. She thought about her father, who had sacrificed so much to give her opportunities he never had. She thought about her younger brother, who looked up to her like she was already a hero. Most of all, she thought about the little girl who had stood in her backyard with a toy rifle, pretending to be the soldier she dreamed of becoming. Tomorrow would determine whether that dream lived or died. The alarm clock read 0200 hours when Sarah gave up trying to sleep. She slipped quietly from her bunk and made her way to the small recreation area where she could think without disturbing others. The base was eerily quiet at this hour, populated only by the occasional security patrol and the ever-present sound of the ocean. She found herself thinking about Chief Williams's words. Performance anxiety. The idea that her mind was betraying her body felt almost worse than simple incompetence. If she just wasn't good enough, she could accept that. But knowing that the capability existed somewhere inside her, locked away by fear and pressure, was maddening. As dawn approached, Sarah made her way to Range 7. The morning air was crisp and salty, carrying the promise of another scorching day. She arrived 15 minutes early, hoping to compose herself before meeting the legendary Commander Morrison. The range was empty, except for a lone figure standing near the equipment shed. Even from a distance, she could tell this was a man accustomed to command. He stood with perfect posture, his attention focused on the targets downrange. As she approached, he turned to face her. Commander Morrison was not what she had expected. He was shorter than she had imagined, with graying temples and weathered hands that spoke of years in harsh conditions. But his eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing as they assessed her approach. "Martinez?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I'm Commander Morrison. Chief Williams tells me you're having some trouble with your marksmanship." Sarah felt the familiar heat of embarrassment. "Yes, sir. I seem to have developed a mental block." He nodded thoughtfully. "Show me." For the next hour, Commander Morrison observed as Sarah went through her usual routine. She missed every shot, just as she had for weeks, but unlike other instructors, he didn't offer immediate advice or corrections. He simply watched, taking notes on a small pad he pulled from his pocket. "Interesting," he said finally. "Sir, your form is excellent. Your breathing is controlled. Your stance is textbook perfect." He paused, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "But you're fighting a war in your head every time you pull that trigger." Sarah felt tears threatening and fought them back. "I don't understand why this is happening, sir. I want this more than anything." "That might be the problem," Commander Morrison said quietly. "Sometimes wanting something too much can be its own kind of poison." He gestured toward a bench near the firing line. "Sit with me for a moment, Martinez. Let me tell you about my first firefight." Commander Morrison settled onto the bench beside Sarah, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. The morning sun painted long shadows across the empty range, and for a moment, the only sound was the distant crash of waves against the shore. "Afghanistan, 2008, he began, his voice quiet but clear. "I was a young officer, cocky as hell, convinced I was invincible. My team was tasked with eliminating a high-value target in a compound about 50 clicks outside Kandahar." Sarah listened intently, grateful for any distraction from her mounting anxiety about the day's evaluation. "The mission went sideways from the moment we hit the ground. Intelligence was wrong. Enemy strength was triple what we expected. And our extraction got delayed by mechanical problems." Commander Morrison's eyes focused on something far beyond the target's downrange. "I found myself pinned down in a bombed-out building with my weapon jammed and Taliban fighters closing in." He turned to look at Sarah directly. "Do you know what saved my life that day?" "Your training, sir?" "No. Well, partially. But what really saved me was my team leader, Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez. When I was frozen with fear, when all my perfect marksmanship training meant nothing because I couldn't think straight, he made a choice." Commander Morrison paused, the weight of memory evident in his expression. "He gave me his sidearm." Sarah frowned, confused. "Sir?" "His personal weapon. A .45 caliber pistol his grandfather had carried in World War II. It wasn't standard issue. Wasn't even officially authorized for that mission. But Sergeant Rodriguez trusted me with the most precious thing he owned." The commander stood and walked to the equipment shed, returning with a rifle Sarah had never seen before. It was clearly military issue but older, with obvious signs of use and careful maintenance. The wooden stock was worn smooth by countless hands, and the metal showed the kind of patina that came from years of dedicated service. "This," he said, holding the rifle reverently, "belonged to my father. He carried it through 3 tours in Vietnam. Before that, my grandfather carried it in Korea." He looked at Sarah with those penetrating eyes. "4 generations of my family have trusted their lives to this weapon." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She understood the significance of what he was showing her, but couldn't comprehend why. "Sir, I don't understand. Chief Williams told me about your performance anxiety, about how you excel when you're alone but fall apart under observation." Commander Morrison sat back down, the rifle resting across his knees. "I've seen it before, though never to this extreme. You're not just afraid of failing, you're afraid of disappointing people who believe in you." The accuracy of his assessment hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Yes, sir. So here's what we're going to do. For the next 6 hours, you're going to train with this rifle. My rifle. My family's rifle. He held her gaze steadily. "And I'm going to trust you with it." Sarah felt overwhelmed. "Commander, I can't. What if I damage it? What if you don't?" He interrupted gently. "Martinez, trust is a two-way street. Right now, you don't trust yourself to succeed. So I'm going to trust you first. And maybe that will show you how." He stood and carefully handed her the rifle. It felt different from the standard weapons she had been training with, heavier, more substantial, somehow more real. The wood was warm against her palms, worn smooth by decades of faithful service. "This weapon has never let my family down," Commander Morrison said. "It's not going to let you down either." For the next hour, he guided her through basic exercises. But instead of focusing on technique, he told her stories. Stories about his grandfather's letters home from the frozen hills of Korea. Stories about his father's nightmares after Vietnam. Stories about his own struggles with doubt and fear during his early career. "The thing about fear," he said as Sarah went through her breathing exercises, "is that it's not the opposite of courage. It's the raw material courage is made from." 1. The raw material courage. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Sarah began to relax. The rifle in her hands wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a symbol of trust, of legacy, of faith that someone else had placed in her. When she finally took aim at the target 200 meters away, she wasn't thinking about hitting or missing. She was thinking about honoring that trust. The first shot missed, but only barely. "Better," Commander Morrison said simply. The second shot clipped the edge of the target. The third shot hit center mass. Sarah lowered the rifle, staring downrange in disbelief. She had actually hit the target. After weeks of failure, she had actually hit the target. "Don't get too excited," Commander Morrison warned. "One shot doesn't make you a marksman. We've got 5 hours left, and by the time we're done, you're going to be sick of hitting that target." He was right. For the next 5 hours, Sarah fired round after round with the commander's family rifle. At first, she was tentative, afraid of breaking the spell that had allowed her to succeed. But as the morning wore on and her hits became more consistent, her confidence began to build. Commander Morrison was a patient but demanding instructor. He pushed her to try different positions, different distances, different environmental conditions. When she started overthinking and her shots began to scatter, he would redirect her attention back to the stories, back to the trust that connected her to the weapon in her hands. "My grandfather used to tell me that a rifle is like a conversation," he said during one of their breaks. "You speak to it with your body, your breathing, your intention. And if you're honest in that conversation, it will speak back to you with accuracy." By noon, Sarah was consistently hitting targets at 300 meters. More importantly, she was beginning to understand that marksmanship wasn't just about mechanical precision. It was about the relationship between shooter and weapon, about trust and communication that went deeper than conscious thought. "There's something else you need to understand," Commander Morrison said, as they prepared for the final phase of training. "The rifle I've given you today, it's not magic. It's just metal and wood. The accuracy you found today was inside you all along." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. The rifle felt special, imbued with the history and legacy of the Morrison family. "Tomorrow, during your evaluation, you'll be using standard equipment again, and you're going to want to panic when you realize that." He looked at her seriously. "But I want you to remember something. The trust I've placed in you today doesn't disappear when you hand back this rifle. Trust isn't about the weapon, it's about the person holding it." As the afternoon training session began, Commander Morrison introduced a new element: stress. He had Sarah perform complex physical exercises before shooting, simulating the kind of fatigue and adrenaline she might experience in real combat situations. He created time pressure, forcing her to acquire targets quickly and fire under artificial deadlines. Most challenging of all, he brought in observers. Other instructors and trainees began appearing at the range, watching her performance just as they would during her official evaluation. At first, Sarah felt the familiar panic rising. Her hands began to shake, her breathing became irregular, and her shots started to miss. But Commander Morrison was there, quietly reminding her about trust, about the conversation between shooter and weapon, about the legacy of service that connected her to something larger than her own fears. "They're not here to judge you," he said softly as she prepared for another shot. "They're here to witness your success." Gradually, Sarah learned to tune out the observers, to focus on the fundamental connection between herself and the target. She began to understand that the pressure she felt wasn't external, it was something she was creating inside her own mind. By late afternoon, she was performing as well under observation as she had during the morning's private session. The rifle that had felt so magical in the morning now felt like a natural extension of her own body. "Outstanding work today, Martinez," Commander Morrison said, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. "But now comes the hard part." Sarah looked at him questioningly. "You have to give the rifle back." The moment he said it, Sarah felt a stab of anxiety. The rifle had become her security blanket, her bridge to confidence and success. The idea of returning to standard equipment for her evaluation filled her with dread. "Sir, this is the most important part of the lesson," Commander Morrison interrupted. "True confidence doesn't depend on external circumstances. It comes from understanding what you're capable of." Reluctantly, Sarah handed back the rifle. It felt like giving away a piece of herself. Commander Morrison accepted it with the reverence it deserved, checking it carefully before securing it in its case. "The trust I've shown you today doesn't disappear with this weapon," he said. "I trusted you with my family's most precious possession, and you honored that trust. Tomorrow, during your evaluation, I want you to trust yourself the same way." As they walked back toward the main facility, Commander Morrison shared one final story. "My father told me something before I deployed to Afghanistan. He said that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting with honor despite the fear. Tomorrow, you're going to be afraid. That's normal. That's human. But you've proven today that you can perform under pressure, that you can honor the trust others place in you." They paused at the entrance to the barracks area. The base was coming alive with evening activity, as trainees returned from various exercises and training sessions. "Get some rest tonight," Commander Morrison advised. "Eat a good meal, hydrate properly, and try not to overthink what happened today. The capability you've shown isn't going anywhere." Sarah nodded, though her mind was already racing with thoughts about the next morning's evaluation. "Commander, what if I freeze up again? What if I can't perform without your rifle?" "Then you'll have learned something important about yourself," he said simply. "But I don't think that's going to happen. Today wasn't about the weapon, Martinez. It was about you learning to trust yourself." As he began to walk away, Sarah called out to him, "Sir? Why did you help me? Why did you trust me with something so valuable?" Commander Morrison paused, considering his answer. "Because Chief Williams believes in you. Because your fellow trainees respect you even when you don't respect yourself. And because sometimes, when someone is drowning, the best thing you can do is throw them a life preserver instead of swimming lessons." That evening, Sarah sat in the mess hall with her fellow trainees. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she belonged at their table. The conversation flowed around her discussions of upcoming exercises, complaints about difficult instructors, speculation about future assignments. "Martinez," said Jackson, one of the top performers in their class, "heard you were working with Commander Morrison today. How'd it go?" "How'd it go?" Sarah thought carefully about her answer. "Educational," she said finally. "That guy's a legend," added Peterson, another trainee. "They say he once made a confirmed kill at over 1,000 meters in a sandstorm. The man's got ice water in his veins," Jackson agreed. Sarah listened to their chatter, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about trust, about legacy, about the weight of expectations that others placed on her and that she placed on herself. Commander Morrison had shown her that trust wasn't just about believing in someone's capability, it was about giving them the space and support to discover that capability for themselves. Later that night, she lay in her bunk reviewing the day's lessons. The mechanical aspects of marksmanship hadn't changed. Breathing, sight alignment, Trigger control remained the same as they always had, but something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of what it meant to shoot accurately under pressure. She thought about Commander Morrison's family rifle, about the generations of servicemen who had carried it into battle. They hadn't been superhuman. They had been ordinary people who found extraordinary courage when it was needed most. Tomorrow would determine whether she could access that same courage without the security of a legendary weapon and an extraordinary mentor. Tomorrow would test whether the trust Commander Morrison had shown her could transform into self-trust. As sleep finally came, Sarah's last conscious thought was about the weight of the rifle in her hands, the warmth of well-worn wood, and the quiet voice of a commander who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Sarah's alarm buzzed at 0430 hours. Though she had been awake for the past 30 minutes, staring at the ceiling and fighting waves of nausea. Today was evaluation day. Today would determine whether weeks of failure would define her military career or whether yesterday's breakthrough with Commander Morrison had been real. The barracks were quiet as she slipped from her bunk and made her way to the head. In the mirror, she saw a young woman who looked older than her 21 years. The stress of the past few weeks had left its mark in the shadows under her eyes and the tight set of her jaw. She dressed methodically in her combat utilities, each movement deliberate and practiced. As she laced her boots, she tried to recall Commander Morrison's words about trust. The rifle she would use today wouldn't be his family heirloom. It would be a standard-issue weapon, identical to the ones she had failed with for weeks. The mess hall was nearly empty when she arrived for breakfast. She forced herself to eat, knowing her body would need fuel for what lay ahead, though every bite sat heavy in her stomach. Jackson and Peterson found her there, offering quiet words of encouragement. "You've got this, Martinez," Jackson said, clapping her on the shoulder. "We've all seen how hard you've been working." Peterson nodded agreement. "Besides, if you wash out, who's going to keep us humble during the physical challenges?" Their faith meant more to her than they could know. These men had watched her fail repeatedly, yet they still believed in her. Commander Morrison's lesson about trust was already proving itself. Sometimes you had to accept others' confidence in you before you could find your own. At 0700 hours, Sarah reported to Range 7 for her final evaluation. Chief Williams was there, along with 2 other instructors she didn't recognize. The atmosphere was formal, clinical. This wasn't training anymore, this was judgment. "Martinez," Chief Williams called. "You'll be firing at 200, 300, and 400-meter targets. Minimum passing score is 70% hits. You have 1 hour to complete the course of fire." Sarah nodded, her throat suddenly dry. 70%. That meant she could miss only 6 shots out of 20. Given her recent track record, it seemed impossible. "Equipment is standard issue," one of the unfamiliar instructors added, gesturing toward a rifle rack. "Select your weapon and take your position." Sarah approached the rack, her hands steady despite the churning in her stomach. The rifles were identical black metal and polymer, efficient and utilitarian. Nothing like the warm wood and worn steel of Commander Morrison's family weapon. She selected a rifle at random and checked it thoroughly, going through the safety procedures she had performed hundreds of times. The weapon felt cold and impersonal in her hands, just another tool rather than a trusted companion. As she moved toward the firing line, Sarah caught sight of a familiar figure standing at the back of the range. Commander Morrison was there, his presence both comforting and nerve-wracking. He had come to witness her evaluation, to see whether his investment of time and trust had been worthwhile. "You may begin when ready," Chief Williams announced. Sarah settled into her firing position and tried to clear her mind. The first target was at 200 meters, the same distance where she had missed countless shots over the past weeks. She controlled her breathing, aligned her sights, and tried to remember the feeling of success from the previous day. The rifle cracked, and she immediately knew the shot was off target. Her heart sank as she saw the white flag raised downrange, signaling a miss. 1 shot fired, 1 shot missed. She was already falling behind the pace she needed to pass. The second shot also missed, then the third. Sarah felt the familiar panic rising, the same crushing anxiety that had plagued her for weeks. The rifle in her hands felt alien and uncooperative. Nothing like the trusted weapon she had used with Commander Morrison. By the fifth shot, she had hit the target only once. At this rate, she would fail spectacularly, confirming everyone's worst expectations about her abilities. She paused, lowering the rifle and trying to control her breathing. In her peripheral vision, she could see the instructors exchanging glances. Chief Williams looked grim, already preparing for another disappointment. Then she heard Commander Morrison's voice, not calling out instructions but speaking quietly to one of the other instructors. The words were barely audible, but she caught the phrase, "Trust herself, trust." The lesson from yesterday came flooding back, not about the magical properties of a particular weapon, but about the relationship between shooter and rifle, about the conversation that could exist when fear wasn't drowning out everything else. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment and thought about Commander Morrison's family rifle. Not because it was special, but because of what it had taught her about connection and confidence. The rifle in her hands now might be different, but her capability hadn't disappeared overnight. She raised the weapon again, but this time, she approached it differently. Instead of fighting against her anxiety, she acknowledged it and set it aside. Instead of thinking about the observers and their expectations, she focused on the simple conversation between herself and the target. The sixth shot hit center mass, then the seventh, and the eighth. Sarah began to find her rhythm, remembering the lessons about trust and communication that Commander Morrison had taught her. Each successful shot built on the last, creating a foundation of confidence that felt more solid than the borrowed magic of a special weapon. When she moved to the 300-meter targets, she maintained her focus. The targets were smaller now, the margin for error reduced, but her shooting remained steady and controlled. She was no longer thinking about passing or failing, she was simply having that conversation with each target, speaking with precision and listening for the response. The 400-meter targets presented the greatest challenge. At that distance, even slight variations in breathing or trigger control could result in dramatic misses. Sarah took her time, using everything Commander Morrison had taught her about patience and trust. When the final shot echoed across the range and the last flag was raised, Sarah lowered her rifle with trembling hands. She had fired 20 rounds total, and from where she stood, it looked like she had hit far more targets than she had missed. "Cease fire," Chief Williams called. "Martinez, clear your weapon and stand by for scoring." The wait for the official results felt eternal. Sarah stood at attention. Her rifle cleared and pointed safely downrange, while the instructors tallied her performance. Around her, the range seemed unnaturally quiet, as if the entire facility was holding its breath. Finally, Chief Williams approached with a clipboard in his hands. His expression was unreadable as he reviewed the scoring sheet. "Martinez," he said formally, "out of 20 shots fired, you achieved 17 hits on target. That's an 85% score, well above the minimum standard for qualification." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. 17 hits. She had actually done it. "Congratulations," Chief Williams continued, his stern expression softening slightly. "You have successfully completed your marksmanship qualification." The other instructors offered their congratulations, and Sarah accepted them graciously, though the whole experience felt surreal. After weeks of failure, success seemed almost impossible to believe. As the formal evaluation concluded and the instructors began to disperse, Commander Morrison approached her. He had remained silent throughout the entire test, offering no coaching or encouragement that might compromise the evaluation's integrity. "Outstanding work, Martinez," he said simply. "Thank you, sir, for everything." "What did you learn today?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I learned that trust isn't something you can borrow from someone else's weapon. You have to find it inside yourself." Commander Morrison nodded approvingly. And I learned that all those weeks when I thought I was failing, I was actually learning. Every missed shot taught me something about myself, about what doesn't work." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The failure wasn't the opposite of success, it was preparation for success. Excellent. That understanding will serve you well in the challenges ahead. As they walked back toward the main facility, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The weeks of frustration and disappointment hadn't been wasted. They had been necessary. Without experiencing that depth of failure, she never would have been ready to accept Commander Morrison's lesson about trust. "Commander," she said as they reached the administrative building, "what happens to your family rifle now? When will you need it back?" He smiled slightly. "I don't. It belongs to my son. Now he's a Marine, stationed in the Pacific. The rifle continues its service with a new generation." Sarah understood. The lesson hadn't been about the weapon itself, but about the trust and legacy it represented. Now she carried that same understanding within herself, ready to pass it on to others who might struggle with their own moments of doubt. That evening, Sarah found herself back in the mess hall with her fellow trainees, but this time the conversation felt different. She was no longer the weak link in their group, the one who might not make it through training. She had proven herself capable of overcoming what had seemed like an insurmountable obstacle. "Heard you crushed your eval today," Jackson said as he sat down with his dinner tray. 85%, Peterson added with obvious admiration. "That's higher than half the class scored on their first attempt." Sarah smiled, accepting their congratulations with genuine gratitude. But more importantly, she felt a new sense of responsibility. She had learned something valuable about overcoming failure and self-doubt, lessons that might help others facing their own challenges. Over the following days, word spread about Sarah's remarkable turnaround. Instructors who had written her off as a lost cause began to take notice of her other exceptional abilities. Her performance in tactical exercises and physical challenges, which had been overshadowed by her marksmanship struggles, suddenly seemed more significant. Chief Williams called her into his office exactly 1 week after her successful evaluation. This time, the atmosphere was entirely different from their previous meeting. "Martinez," he said without preamble, "I've been reviewing your complete training record. Your marksmanship qualification was the final piece of a very impressive puzzle." Sarah waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I'm recommending you for advanced leadership training," Chief Williams continued. "Your performance demonstrates exactly the kind of resilience and determination we look for in future SEAL team leaders." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but also humility. "Chief, I don't know what to say. Say you'll continue to honor the trust that's been placed in you. Commander Morrison told me about your training session, about the lesson he taught you regarding trust and legacy." Chief Williams leaned back in his chair. "The military is built on that kind of trust, the faith we place in each other to overcome impossible odds and accomplish the mission." As Sarah left Chief Williams' office that day, she carried with her a new understanding of what it meant to serve. The marksmanship qualification had been just the beginning. The real test would be living up to the trust that others had placed in her, and learning to extend that same trust to those who would serve alongside her. Months later, as she prepared for her first operational deployment, Sarah often thought about Commander Morrison's family rifle and the lesson it had taught her. She had learned that failure wasn't the end of the story, it was often the beginning of wisdom. Trust wasn't something you earned once and kept forever, it was something you had to prove worthy of every single day. The little girl who had dreamed of becoming a warrior had finally grown into a woman who understood what true strength looked like. It wasn't about never falling down, it was about getting back up, learning from the fall, and helping others do the same. Sarah Martinez had found her place among the elite warriors she had always admired, not because she was perfect, but because she had learned to trust herself enough to be perfectly human.